Welcome to Scream Therapy. I'm your host, Jason Schreurs. For as long as I can remember, I took solace in music. I used it as an escape. I used it for comfort, and I used it for therapy. When I discovered underground music, another world opened up. It felt right. Punk rock, hardcore, and metal carried me through tough times in my life, until it couldn't anymore. At the age of 47, I found myself across from a psychiatrist who was telling me that I was bipolar. I knew next to nothing about this disorder. The first thing I did when I got home from the hospital was set my entire music library on shuffle. I used the loudness to block out the noises in my head. Scream therapy comes to me in many forms, playing in bands, going to shows, and blasting music into my headphones. Underground music and mental health have always been connected. These are the stories of those who are tackling mental health issues head-on, and using music as a crucial tool to do so. Loud music is raw, it's visceral, and it's healing. This is Scream Therapy.
Trying to move on, I'm trying to feel more important. I want to be fine, that's why I'm trying to be my best. Walking backward.
The first time I saw Spanish Love Songs, who were about to release their third album, Brave Faces Everyone, it was at Prefest in Tampa 3 or 4 years ago. I walked in on their set and saw my friends at the front with big smiles on their faces. Unlike me, they knew what was coming. I didn't know who Spanish Love Songs' songwriter Dylan Slocum was at the time. I mean, he was singing and playing guitar in front of me, but I didn't know what his songs meant and how they had become such an inspiring part of my life over the next few years. I later realized that many of Dylan's songs are about depression. I'm often very depressed myself, and his songs became a small way of coping with my sadness by finding glimmers of hope in his music. Dylan and I discussed music and depression, and it turns out he's an inspiring conversationalist as well. Do you remember when you first got into punk rock and realized that it was a place for you?
I mean, it just kind of happened. I had an older brother, so Green Day's Dookie came out when I would have been 6, and he was 11 or, going on 12 or so. So that was like prime time for him. And I had young parents too. So it was around from the time I was about 6 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
I was kind of doomed. And then, as like a young middle schooler with a high school brother, it was just like a never ending, me stealing his CDs, so like AFI, like Black Sails, and then stuff like Homegrown and the Ataris and stuff like that. So it's been nonstop.
Whenever I hear the word Ataris, I always think of that big blowout they had on stage when I guess they got fired or something. Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Like threw his guitar at the drummer or something.
Yeah, just an example of how playing music can sometimes eat into your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I've never felt tempted to throw my instrument at somebody. That's some, you got to be pretty deep in it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Can you explain your relationship to depression? I know a lot of the songs talk about depression. I mean, you mentioned like not being able to get off the couch at least 12 times in your discography. But can you tell me a little bit about that and how it became part of your life, or when you first sort of noticed it coming on?
Yeah. I mean, the references and stuff, it's just something that exists, right? It's just something I've had, something I've recognized, something I deal with, something that comes and goes. And as I've gotten older, something I've been able to recognize more acutely, where I can like sit down and be like, oh, here it comes.
Yeah.
I don't know when it first happened. I can't pinpoint it. More so, it's like an old friend, right? As long as you look back, you kind of go, oh yeah, I guess maybe that's what was happening.
An old friend or an old enemy?
Yeah. However you want to look at it. But, I think there was probably a time in my early to mid 20s where I looked at it far more as a detriment than maybe I do now, as opposed to just trying to chill and just understand, that it's just a part of you, as opposed to trying to fight necessarily, or feel. For me, the idea of fighting it feels like admission of being broken or something.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, that it's part of you and it's not going to take you down.
Yeah, and I mean it's helped that in being able to talk about it, I've gotten to start living out some cool dreams.
Yeah,
So I mean, it's hard to be angry at this thing that's tied into largely what I do.
totally. Yeah. I guess one of the cool things about the band is that even though the lyrics are quite sad and quite depressing, that's sort of your MO, isn't it? That you're kind of you're writing about sad topics, but you're trying to make it hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a long process because I feel like when we were first starting, it was just a bunch of songs I had lying around about, certain relationships ending and stuff like that. So that, I mean, those relationship songs don't need to be hopeful, right? Like breakup songs are breakup songs.
Yeah.
And then on Schmaltz, it was also fine for it to not be hopeful because that whole album was just being like, I'm a piece of shit. And you know what? This is how it is. And again, that doesn't necessarily need to be hopeful, although I find hopeful moments on it. The newer one is, I think, a lot more of a concerted effort to be hopeful, which is great for that positivity. I think that's kind of been our MO in terms of like helping people realize they're not necessarily alone in all these feelings, because that's, I think, a very powerful realization.
The way that I describe my depressive episodes when I have them, I'm diagnosed bipolar, so I kind of go through the different, from down, down, down to up, really up.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when I'm quite down, I describe it as kind of like having a heavy blanket over top of you, and it's like the blanket sort of holding you down, and actually like one of those weighted blankets, right? But you're underneath of it, and it's like, how do you get out? Does that ring true for you?
Absolutely. I am probably dealing with that a little bit right at the moment.
Yeah.
But not in any negative way. Just I always just feel lazy.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel like doing anything. And like right now we leave in like a day, and I've been surprisingly chill about it. But I think it's mostly because I've been too lazy to do anything. And I like right before we got on this, I was like purging my inbox to get it down to 0 so that I leave for tour with nothing outstanding. And I got downstairs and then my buzzer went off and I was like, oh yeah, we're talking in like 10 minutes. So it was a funny morning. It was like motivation, here I come. And
yeah, for sure.
And now it's been fun to kind of look back and be like, oh no, I've just been lazy the last few days, and that's fine. You can do that. It doesn't help that it's dead of winter. It's nice to sit inside, not do anything.
For sure. One of the things that I always find that like having that heavy blanket over top of me is, it's strange because, and you mentioned about jumping into action, but if I get a text from a friend to go for a walk or something, all of a sudden the blanket comes flying off and I'm out the door. It's just sort of that weird juxtaposition between being really down and being up.
That rings very true. I find being impulsive often helps get rid of the blanket, but I mean that just leads to a lot of online shopping and stuff like that. Yeah. It's just like, I feel bored. I feel this. I feel like not moving. Let me sit here and watch videos on, music gear I don't need or can't afford, and somehow still buy and then deal with the consequences later.
Yeah, totally. I've read a lot of stuff, things that you said before the first 2 records, feeling like you were just this sort of loser, underachiever guy that was never going to really get anywhere. And now you're getting to the point where, you are getting somewhere. I mean, I saw you last year at Fest and you played one of the biggest venues there. And how does that feel to know sort of in the past that you weren't sure about really getting anywhere and now you are?
I don't think it's changed at all. I think we largely still feel like we're not getting anywhere. I know it seems contrary, but I think that's the scope of being the type of person who plays and the type of band that we play in. I was talking to a friend the other day who is selling out 3,000 person rooms, and they were like, I am still absolutely terrified that nobody's going to come, or like we're not going to sell tickets.
Yeah.
And he was like, and I've talked to other people about this, they're like, no matter what stage of your career that you're at, it never feels like it's going well. So, I mean, yeah, it's fine. I mean, we're definitely psyched and excited and getting to do a lot of cool things. So I will never complain about that. It's a gift.
Yeah.
But I think we're very aware of, how fleeting that could be. So maybe we're having our moment and that's great, but that moment could disappear. Maybe we're not actually having our moment. Maybe we're just having a very brief foray into something that will go horribly wrong sooner than later.
I know that when I'm quite depressed, everything seems like it's a joke. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm a loser. All those kinds of things.
I think it's more just like being a 31-year-old musician, just doing something kind of outrageous is, I don't know. It's just a spot that I've always felt like I can stand back and see how absurd it is. And so just treating it with zero expectations, because like we don't deserve any of this. Like people owe us nothing. So, and if we deserve nothing and we expect nothing, then everything that happens is cool. And if everything that happens is cool, then the grind of it disappears.
Yeah.
So like I love every aspect of what we do. I love unloading our gear, loading into a venue, and I love sound checking, and I love sitting around and doing nothing, or I love eating shitty hummus in a green room. Like that's great. At a time where I could be complaining about having to unload an amp, my friends have been in an office for 6 hours. It fits me better, and staying optimistic about it and keeping my expectations in check. If you don't expect anything, then that kind of keeps that fear at bay.
The podcast is called Scream Therapy. Do you think that music is therapy for you?
I think it's an outlet. I think it's a way for me to tell these stories and discover some things that I might not have discovered otherwise. I don't see it as actual therapeutic like growth, and you know what I mean, like adjusting some of the behaviors that I have. But it's definitely a good outlet. It's like keeping a journal, right? It's like creating art. It's it's like any of those. I think I would align it more with that type of therapeutic endeavor, but I wouldn't call it therapy in and of itself necessarily.
Have you gotten traditional therapy?
Off and on, mostly back when I was in college, and had easier access to it. One of the downfalls of the American healthcare system is both inconsistent insurance coverage and just outrageous prices.
Yeah.
So it's been a constant seeking out of putting in the effort to find somebody who, for example, would work on a sliding scale, but then deciding like, do I want to do that, or do I want to have money to go do something I enjoy?
Yeah.
Or do I want to have money for groceries?
You're going to work on yourself with the money. You're going to work on having a life, living.
And that's maybe my own personal kind of downfall. I feel like living in LA, it was very hip to go to therapy, not as a judgment call, but you know what I mean? If you didn't go, at least in a group of friends that I had, it was like, what do you mean you don't have money to go? Like, what is that about? You know what I mean? And it became a very kind of classist coded thing. Mm-hmm. So for a long time, I was just like, well, fuck you. What works for you doesn't necessarily have to work for me. But it would be great if everybody had just total access and could go when they felt they needed to go. And I think everybody could benefit from it. I know I certainly have.
It is very important. Yeah. And, it's one of those things where you have to work on yourself. Otherwise, it erodes after a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to recognize when that erosion's occurring and when you need to kind of check back in with people. And it's a hard thing to force yourself to do, especially if that heavy blanket's on you and you're like, well, why bother? Or a big part of it is finding the kind of theoretical framework that works for you and what you're trying to do, whether, it's more like a traditional kind of psychotherapy or something like behavioral focused or, something like that. And it's tiring kind of cycling through different paradigms, you know what I mean? And going to different people and trying to hear how they're going to approach what you feel is wrong with you. I think it's for everybody in certain frameworks. And I think trying to force yourself into something is not always a healthy thing either.
Yeah, totally. I've pretty much tried it all at this point, but I mean, some things better than others, right? So I'm really enjoying right now a dialectical behavioral therapy course that I'm taking, and it's kind of like CBT, but with some extra mindfulness stuff thrown in.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you got to find your fit, right? And I mean, like I said, I've gone through so many different counselors, but it's been more a question of not knowing what was going on. So I'll go in for a counseling session saying that I have, situational depression, and then eventually I realized it's much more than that.
Yeah, it's good to be able to find what works for you and be able to apply that. And I think that applications largely becomes the more important thing. But yeah, it's definitely a lot. Sorry, I just had a flat. My ex-wife is a marriage therapist, and
Okay.
you said CBT, and I just flashed back to like so many things. It was so funny.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
oh yes, I've sat around and had these discussions before. She is I believe, a CBT focused therapist.
Are you guys still close?
Not at all. Haven't talked
No.
to her in a decade.
Okay. And when did you get divorced? Like what year?
A decade ago. I was young and hurt. It was actually like probably the least interesting thing. We came apart very easily by design. I think we were both people who kept our stuff separated just enough. And like, yeah, it was I did it way too young, and then B, it ended very young. So it was just like I was a pissy 22-year-old. Like that made sense. Like, of course.
Yeah. Do you think that because you mentioned she does CBT courses, was she able to help you at all with your mental health?
Well, this was early, so this is when
Okay.
we finished undergrad and she was applying to grad school. So it was more, and like we had taken a lot of classes together, mostly because I was an English major and the psych minor was there and accessible, and I needed to fill extra credits. And you know what I mean? Like they were fun
Yeah.
classes to take and fun things to like just get college philosophical about. But it was still early days, and I think she was still trying out stuff on me, but I wasn't listening.
We all have a low point in our lives when we realize that things have gone really off the rails. Do you remember what yours was?
Oh boy. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I have at certain points been like, oh, this is low. I remember there was times right after all that happened, where I wouldn't leave my apartment, or, you know what I mean? I stayed in the same
Yeah.
sweats for a week or stuff like that. But I never really saw it as a low point. I was just like, this is something I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm of the firm belief that it can always get worse. There's always a bottom to keep dropping out. Or that's just in my experience. You know what I mean? Anytime I've ever thought like, oh, this is the worst, it's like, no, and it could always be much worse, which to me is a kind of a positive thing.
Yeah.
If it can always get worse, then
Can always get
that
better
means
too.
that, yeah, it can always get better. If you're feeling like you're a 3 on that particular day, you could always be feeling like a 1. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and if you're feeling like a 1, you could always be feeling like nothing. So that's just my own personal experience. I've never actually sat down and been like, this is rock bottom, which I'm lucky, I guess, that I've never felt that way, or I just lack the self-awareness to
Yeah.
have recognized that.
It's interesting that you mentioned the numbers, because I run a support group here in my town, and we actually do that at the beginning of the support group. We go around the circle and rate ourselves how we're feeling by number, and then at the end we actually do it again and see where we're at. So the numbers are a good way to do it.
Funny enough, in like one of the last interviews that Scott Hutchison from Frightened Rabbit gave, he talked about feeling like a 6 out of 10 on any day. Then I kind of wrote that down, and it became kind of just like a fun way to describe some feelings, and then I started writing songs for the new album, and I almost wrote it down as like a little ode to that. But literally the first line of the new album is, on any given day I'm a 6 of 10. So it's funny that you run a group similar using that kind of method, because I do find that to be a very helpful barometer.
Sure.
Some days you're a 6, some days you're an 8, some days you're a 4.
Yeah.
And he said something very profound to me, which is like, he felt pretty lucky to be a 6 most of the time.
Yeah.
And I also kind of feel that kind of general flatness, for better or worse. Some days it's a gift, and some days it's like, man, some days you're like, man, I wish I could love anything the way that person loves that thing that I think is stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about Scott and Frightened Rabbit? I mean, I don't really follow the music very much, and I've heard his name batted around quite a bit. Lauren from Warriors was talking about him as well. So
yeah, I think Scott was important to a lot of people, especially amongst musicians. He felt very much like a musician's musician, and he wrote about things much in the way that I feel I do, and much that I know Lauren does. In very matter of fact, this is kind of laid out how it's feeling, and then he obviously suffered from his own afflictions, and what was it, 2018 he took his own life.
Yeah.
So it was one of those people who you listen to and you're like, there always also seemed to be some positive at the end of it, right? And so when the worst thing that could happen happens, it's shocking, and you kind of revisit some things and try to understand it, but it's something that's not necessarily understandable.
Yeah. Was it documented
So,
that he was living with depression?
I believe so. I mean, he was very blunt about it. You know, he went missing first, and his brother had mentioned they had a phone call, and he was very unwell, and he was worried about him. And then obviously he was missing, and then they found his body. So
Wow.
it was a bit of a, I guess shocking is not the right word, because if anybody who's that open about it and has talked about having suicidal ideations and stuff like that, it's not shocking, but it's still, it kind of guts you a little bit. I never got the chance to meet him. I had a few mutual friends, but never actually, he was to me like a generation ahead of me in terms of like music circles and cliques. But I think he was just an incredibly important artist to a lot of us. So I think it was a weird one, mostly because of the connection you feel to somebody's music, which is, I'm sure, the same connection, or I know it's the same connection because I've heard people describe it to me, that people feel with me, and you feel like you have an insight into somebody, even though a lot of times it's a story being told. But you know what I mean? Anybody who's writing something is present in the story.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an interesting thing. More so for me, it connected to my own personal life and losing friends close to me in a kind of similar manner. So it all just kind of mashes together.
Do you sometimes deal with suicidal ideation?
No, not usually. I mean, not usually sounds like I do. It's not so much of like thoughts. It's more just like, it's been a few times where you're just like, oh, that's a thing. You know what I mean? Not so much of the ideation, but it's like, oh, that's a thing. I could be dead. Like that's the alternative. And usually I find that as a marker of, well, I'm glad I like being alive. Even in the darkest moments, I tend to try to keep my own personal idea of like a level head about it.
Yeah, I love your attitude. That's so great. It's hard for folks that are living with depression and other mental health issues to really have that positive attitude. And last time I went to my appointment with my psychiatrist, she's like, actually I feel some acceptance from you this time. And it's all about looking on the bright side and trying to find the positive out of the negative, I think. Yeah,
and I don't know what it is. I think for a long time I was just not knowing what it was.
Yeah.
Just kind of a willful ignorance of like, this is just how I am. And if this is just how I am, then I have no choice. And then as I've gotten older, these terms have become kind of more accepted. Then it becomes something I can talk about, but something I can talk about and let out, especially in song and story, but then kind of exercise it that way and then be back to like, this is just how I am. You know what I mean? And I think that surprises a lot of people. I've been made to feel guilty about it on occasion. Of you sound so depressed in your songs, but you're so normal in person and you seem so even keeled. And I'm like, well, what is this, like a pissing match about who can be the most depressed? Because that's stupid.
Yeah.
And so I'm a normal person who can spin some dark things together to exercise my own emotions and then B, elicit a response because it's art.
Yeah. Did you feel like you might be doing this? Like, did you ever think, oh, I'll be singing in a band that, talks about these issues?
No, these have always just been the songs I wrote. I became very aware of it when we were working on the new album because the last album was so much about me and my issues, and I didn't want people to feel like I was putting up some front. So we kind of broadened the story out and broadened the scope of what we're doing. And, the new album is very much not about me. It's about other people and trying to find a commonality among it.
So you got tired of talking about yourself a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, a great quote from Scott. It was something I found just offhand when we were working on the album. I don't even know why it was in that piece, but it was something about like, nobody wants to hear you complain about sitting in the back of a van. You're living out such an exciting thing. Even if you don't feel well, it's not interesting to talk. And again, this is a generalization, but it's a generalization that rings true to me. Like, I personally don't find it interesting to complain about being bummed out in the back of a van, not because it's not real and not because touring isn't difficult, but because my shitty feeling in the back of a van on like a Thursday, well, that's somebody's night out that week. That's somebody's best night out. Like, that's somebody trying to make the most. They worked all day, spent money, and they're out, and they're there to see us. It feels disingenuous to sit there and be like, well, I'm sad. I can be sad, but I can also put on a performance and realize, like, I don't take for granted what we get to do.
Yeah. I was looking at a website about you, and they actually said, this is pretty lame and pretty harsh, but they actually described your music as grouch rock.
Yeah, I know. That's funny because we call ourselves that when we first started out. Somebody asked us like what we sounded like, and I forget which one of us it was, but it was like, we're just like grouch rock, because I've like people like to call me grouchy, and we like called ourselves that as just like a fun joke when we were first starting out, and then we stopped mostly because I didn't like being called self-proclaimed grouch rock.
Yeah. No, it's not good.
It was a joke, but like, you know, it is true. It's how do you describe an indie punk emo leaning band? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's all labels. Like,
a guy complaining.
We do what we do. Yeah, exactly. It's a guy complaining about
complaint rock.
Yeah.
I actually think I'd like to play in a band called Grimace Rock. Like, you know, Grimace from McDonald's. I don't know. That'd be pretty rad. Dressed in purple.
Yeah. I'm sure there's somebody who's done it.
Do you get cranky when you're depressed?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the grouch rock thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to play a game?
Sure.
When I get cranky, whether it's in the depression or the necessarily side, I start to get really bothered and irritated by all kinds of things that aren't necessarily, not necessarily things that I should be irritated by. So maybe we can take turns just rattling off some of the things that do that for us, and I can start. I think one for me is when I'm on like a ferry, like we have a ferry here that goes across the water, and all of a sudden some dude pulls out a guitar and starts playing guitar on the ferry. And,
oh God, no!
Yeah. So that's one that really bothers me.
This could be an endless game because I feel like I'm like this even when I'm not in deep on something. Somebody was talking on their cell phone on the floor of the gym the other day when there's a big sign that says no cell phones in the gym. Get off your goddamn phone. That applies everywhere. Just get off your phone. Yeah,
a similar one for me was eating Thai food at a restaurant with my wife, and then all of a sudden this person was FaceTiming with their like daughter or something.
Oh,
yeah, I actually told her to stop.
Let me see. This is a very musician specific one, but I hate, like, if I'm not in a great mood, I hate hearing loud music being played around me, especially like, I just hate loudness, I guess. Like, if you're not feeling well and you're in the green room and somebody's banging on something or just making noise for no reason, it's just like, yo, just take it down.
Yeah, I got a couple related to that. One is that when you're at a metal show, they always crank metal like between the bands.
Oh yeah,
and you're
of
just
course.
like, well, the whole night is metal. Like, do I really need to be hearing like Cannibal Corpse between the bands, like super loud?
Let's break it up. Let's do some other stuff.
And the other one is during sound check when you've got somebody from one of the bands sound checking, but they just like, you know, the drummer's trying out like weird jazz rolls and stuff, and you're just like, dude, the sound check's over. Sound checks are a weird thing. I mean, I'm trying to think more specifically to like not musician related things. I mean, here's my problem is that this game is endless, but it's only endless if I can remember the specifics, because everything's bothersome. If we're going to turn this inward, right, of things that are annoying in these feelings, I tend, especially when the metaphorical heavy blanket is over me, I tend not to do things that aren't serving any purpose. Yeah.
So, like, why would I make the bed? Yeah. I'm just going to mess it up again. And that drives people crazy. In fact, I can often tell if it's going to be a successful relationship if the other person doesn't make the bed either, because we're on the same wavelength. Or like, I don't need throw pillows.
Yeah. How about doilies?
Like, no, don't give me, like, I need functional, because, you know, if you spend 30 seconds every day taking throw pillows on and off the bed, then over the course of the year, that's added up to a significant amount of time.
Yeah. You could have written 2 songs in that time.
Yeah, exactly. I know that's obnoxious to like live that way, but
oh well,
Yeah,
It's
it is.
life.
Yeah, this is my brain.
Well, thanks a lot for being on the podcast today, Dylan. I really appreciate it. And I just love your attitude around, how you deal with your depression and kind of using it for more the posy side of things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's something I've really tried to figure out in my mid to late 20s, because it used to be the other way. And I would be very insufferable. Have you ever had a situation where you're with somebody and like something goes wrong and one person freaks out and then you get super focused? I feel that on like a broader scale, like the crazier the world gets and like the more it feels like like the world's ending, the more clarity can kind of come through. And again, that's like a very big focus on the new album of like recognizing that we're all on the same sinking ship. Everybody's feeling, for all of the neurodiversity in the world, a lot of these feelings are they trend towards the universal.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people are just struggling to get by and working to survive. That's it. That is the human drive in late capitalism. It's something that I've struggled to come to terms with and have really tried to be more, I guess, zen about, or whatever you want to call it. Talk to me in 2 months. I'm sure I will be frayed beyond belief and just want to take a nap for a week. But, that's what resets are for. If you can find the time to figure out how to take care of yourself, I think that's all you can really hope for. And then maybe once you can take care of yourself, you can start to take care of others too.
Say keep your head up if you're not okay. But not okay is what's expected. They claim you're a hero if you can make it off the couch. You know the truth in what they say. The world's gonna kick you either way.
Thanks for joining me again on Scream Therapy. You can check me out at soundcloud.com/screamtherapy. Remember, don't be afraid to ask for help, and take care of yourself.